right? 2 Samuel 1, let's call this one He Thought, which is a quote or roughly a quote that's going to come out of the second chapter actually, but let's subtitle it regifting, because regifting is a thing that can happen when you get a gift for someone but you don't adequately understand what it is they could actually use or what they actually might have wanted. Thus, it'll tempt them to want to give it away to somebody else instead of actually putting it to good use. And that's what's going to happen in this chapter that divides up roughly into two stories. One, in the first half, an Amalekite who seems to have served with Israel during the battle between Israel and the Philistines is going to bring news to David of Saul's death. And he's also going to bring evidence. He's going to bring that to David, but he's going to do bad math in trying to spice up the story a little bit and basically take credit for killing Saul, possibly believing that that would impress David, but it's going to have a very different effect. He's going to get regifted in a very harsh way when instead of getting a commendation for killing Saul, David's going to command one of his young men to execute the young man for killing Saul. See, there are times when we can try to bring a gift to someone and that gift is more likely to get re-gifted the less we understand about what the person actually wants or needs. The young man didn't understand David well enough to understand how killing Saul would actually affect him. And so instead of currying favor with David, the lie that the young man told got him killed. In the second half of the chapter, we're going to see David lament Saul using a phrase that's relatively famous, and it's going to come up 3 times in the chapter, concluding the chapter actually in verse 27, where it says, how the mighty have fallen. And in this particular statement, he's also going to add, and the weapons of war perished. And that is going to seem to show us the way in which Saul might not have been all that different from the young man who took credit for killing him. See, the young man did bad math and forgetting that one, he came from the Amalekites, people who were already devoted to destruction, people who Saul was actually punished for not devoting to destruction. He came from a people who were skating on thin ice with God. The reason they were on thin ice with God is because they were notorious for using underhanded means on those who were vulnerable, understanding the way that they attacked Israel on the way out of Egypt as they were weak and tired. So much like the young man failed to consider all of the things that made his confession to killing Saul a very dangerous thing to do, Saul did not take into account the way in which the weapons of war would not protect him from God's prophecy that David was going to be king anyway. Saul is going to get the math all wrong, thinking that he can prolong his kingdom and the kingdom of his son Jonathan just by killing God's anointed. And even though David's life was spared so that he would actually sit on the throne of Israel, even in death, God can still accelerate his purpose, understanding that he allowed the Christ to be killed, but the murder of the Christ was simply going to pour accelerant on the flame, for lack of a better term, making what God was going to accomplish through Christ that much more successful. And so whether God preserves the life of his anointed or allows his anointed to be struck down, his purposes are still going to be accomplished. Something that Saul and the religious leaders of Jesus' time learned the hard way, which is in many ways why Jesus might have said, he who has an ear to hear, let him hear. But the thing that David seems to understand in his lamentation for Saul is that this is so much bigger than revenge, because David is going to specifically say in verse 20, tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. And he's not just looking down on the Philistines. He understands the way in which a loss for Saul is a loss for Israel. And that's what good leadership seems to understand, the ways in which small acts have larger implications. And so even though David has a personal interest in seeing Saul fall, he understands the ways in which Saul falling also hurts the nation, and they still have a battle to fight against the Philistines. So as we often say, God's best to you as you go forward in him, God willing, understanding the larger implications for smaller actions, even if the small action is God giving you a victory over an adversary. May we be the kind of people who see the larger implications even in times when we seem to have won a victory.